the fact that even GM itself had a record-breaking profit year. None of that really comes up directly. It was replaced with the smarmy man on the street interviews and the lady that literally clubs a rabbit to death on film. That's what you get instead of some of the things that answer the hypotheticals that he kind of just like teases out there.
Under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Buried deep, but we're breaking the locks. Footage got cut, they erase all the shots. We say connect the dots. Under the docks, under the docks, yeah, under the docks.
Under the Docks, we're back. Paranoid American, Sean Chris from Kill the Mockingbirds. Roger and Me, 1989. This was directed and narrated by Michael Moore. Why are we looking at this one? We're actually going to do 3 different Michael Moore movies, I feel, to kind of balance out some of the Alex Jones stuff that we just got into. We had a Alex Jones month, so Michael Moore month kind of felt like a good way to counterbalance that. I don't know. What do you think?
I definitely agree. And fun fact, like Michael Moore is kind of like the person that got me into a lot of these documentaries because at the time I was out of high school, like in 2002 or 2001, I was like 18 around that time. So this was pretty influential. And I had an AOL email address called Moore Madness, MOORE.
And it was about Michael Moore?
Yeah, and I was just all because I was all about Michael Moore. Like that was my email for AOL.
Well, hopefully no one's gonna like hack into your AOL email now.
I don't even know it.
You just doxed it.
If they do hack it, give me the password because I don't even know it.
So why are we talking about this movie in particular, Roger and Me? Mainly because this was Michael Moore's breakout documentary. This is the one that kind of put him on the map. But it also kind of shows you the DNA of what every Michael Moore documentary after this is going to look like. It's going to have some humor and some outrage. There's going to be a lot of juxtaposition where someone's saying something and then you see the exact same opposite as the visual. It's a lot of pointing out hypocrisy, a lot of dry humor and sarcasm. And I would almost argue and say that without these Michael Moore documentaries, starting with Roger and Me, you don't necessarily get like a Daily Show or a Colbert Report, or even on the other side, you don't get an Alex Stein or like a Steven Crowder.
I agree, and I think that Michael Moore is the yin to Alex Jones yang. Like they kind of live in the same world. It sounds peculiar to people, but they are actually more alike than you would think. They may never admit that, and they have different biases and different sides, but they have a lot more in common than you think.
When we get to the end of Michael Moore month, we'll actually show that pretty directly about that comparison of Alex Jones and Michael Moore. So anyways, the summary, in case you haven't seen this particular documentary yet, it's basically about Michael Moore returning to his hometown of Flint, Michigan, and he attempts, spoiler, unsuccessfully, to confront the GM CEO, who's this guy named Roger Smith, hence the name Roger and Me, about the closing of the GM plant and everything that ensued after that, the basic economic collapse of Flint, Michigan, the rising crime rates, just fill in all the different blanks. This movie attempts to sort of paint how that happened, maybe not necessarily why it happened, but we'll kind of get into that.
Yeah, it really kind of is not, I wouldn't say a sap piece, but it really is tugging on your heartstrings of like what happened to Flint. And living out here personally now, I wasn't there at the time, but in the past 10 years, I've been in Michigan, and Flint is pretty dilapidated. So like the argument makes a lot of sense. I also think that with these films of us diving back in time, for me, it keeps striking these chords of like, man, how things have not changed as much as we think they have, or how it still correlates with today.
The first key claim of this movie is that General Motor closes these 11 plants in Flint, Michigan while opening up new factories in Mexico, where people were basically getting paid about 70 cents an hour versus the 15 to $20 an hour, roughly, that were all union jobs that were there in Flint, Michigan. And that over the course of time, this leads to about 30,000 different jobs being lost in Flint, which completely guts the economy. And Michael Moore, I guess, sort of shows that this wasn't a move of desperation, that it was just for profitability. I'm so shocked that a global conglomerate would work towards profitability. But I guess that's the first major claim, is that they closed these factories when they didn't necessarily have to. They didn't have to go to Mexico.
Yeah, and he even has and during the film, a lobbyist for GM, and he kind of coaches it to where he's saying like, well, they had to do this for the bottom line, right? Because like things would go bad, but then Michael Moore kind of presses throughout the film of like, no, you didn't have to do this. You guys were thriving.
Right. Well, he makes a couple different examples in this. First, the GM perspective. The reason that they say like we have to do this was because there was competition from Japan, and Japan was kind of crushing it with their car sales versus American sales during this time period. They also they claimed they had to cut their labor costs in order to remain competitive with Japan and all these other countries. And that move into Mexico, that even though their wages were under $1 an hour, it was necessary for financial survival. And that guy that you're talking about, who's actually working for GM while Michael Moore is interviewing him, he basically makes that claim. Well, it's either that or we go bankrupt and everyone loses all of their jobs. And it's not just people in this one city, which turns out wasn't necessarily true. I mean, hindsight being 2020, but they were profitable. In fact, that was one of their most profitable years to date. When he was interviewing this guy as they're shutting down, they had made $4 billion. But $4 billion sure doesn't sound as nice as $6 billion. And $6 billion doesn't sound as good as $20 billion. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, you got to get that 70 cents an hour, 77 cents an hour. I think they claimed people were making in Mexico compared to 15. It does sound pretty tempting.
It gets worse too. We'll get there. So the second claim was that while they're outsourcing these jobs, GM told the American unions that they were completely broke, and they used this to negotiate wage cuts. And there's even a few different interviews with ex-employees that worked at the GM plant, and they're saying the reason why wages got cut was because the union was weak, and the union was weak because there were a lot of union members that were very cozy with management. That was a direct quote from one of the ex-workers that they were talking to, so that they had already been cutting wages back. They were already trying to drive it down, but because the union existed, they weren't able to push it much farther down than $15 an hour, which I looked up, the equivalent is about $40 an hour now, considering inflation, which makes this movie kind of topical too, right? Because we are also looking at a whole bunch of layoffs in all different types of industries right now.
I also thought the reason that it kind of sticks out today, and to your point, not just the layoffs, but everybody talking about tariffs, right? And the point of kind of this tariff thing of like, well, yeah, a lot of these big corporations did move overseas or move to other countries for cheaper labor, and it destroyed cities. This is the one they're talking about here, Flint, but there's plenty other cities that this has happened to.
That's a great example for, let's take this exact movie. The premise, I'm understanding, the very simplified premise of these tariffs are, GM says, you know what, we're going to move to Mexico, or we're going to move to whatever the country is. And the government comes in and says, okay, that's fine, but we're going to charge you triple the cost of goods when it, comes back into the country. And then they say, oh, well, that's technically not going to save us any real money or change the bottom line. So I guess we're going to have to just innovate or offer some other value rather than just completely decimating the hourly wages of the people that are going in creating this stuff. So that was the decision, and they made the decision, and it worked out for GM, but it kind of didn't work out for Flint. The third point that he kind of conveys are that local officials responded to the closure of this huge, GM industry that employed almost everyone in town. Instead of figuring out some way to get the economy bounced back, they invest almost all of their budget into advertising campaigns to turn Flint now into a tourist attraction. And the slogan was something like, come check out the new Spark in Flint, Michigan, or like, we haven't lost our spark or something. They build a brand new shopping mall. They build the world's first and only indoor carousel ride, I guess, or Ferris wheel rather. They run a whole bunch of different campaigns where they're trying to throw concerts and music. They get Pat Boone in. They get the previous Miss America to come in and just kind of boost people's morale and tell them, hey, it could always be worse. You could be starving on the street or something. But that was sort of funny to see how the town is trying to react by just throwing and just literally burning money. And at one point, they even have this magazine called Money Magazine that declares Flint the worst place in the country to live. So they actually show people literally burning money magazine. But it was just a very well done juxtaposition by Michael Moore.
Yeah, and to bring some of the jobs, they were kind of introducing like, hey, well, there's all these great jobs like Taco Bell. Like, they're like, this is why people keep quitting Taco Bell that used to work at GM. They say Taco Bell's much harder. And they were kind of poking fun at the GM people. But I think my favorite part was when they were talking about, the crime rate growing and they had to build a new jail. And I found this fascinating that they had a grand opening for a jail. First of all, I didn't even know they did that. Like, I think of it like a ribbon cutting ceremony, but no, they had a grand opening and people paid $100 to stay the night, couples at the jail. That to me, just like, that was like the epitome of America. I was like, yeah, what a country.
A large portion of this movie is talking to out of touch, rich, I want to say 70 to 80-year-old people that are at these country clubs in Flint, Michigan, are clearly separated from society. Waldorf Astoria. He goes to these ritzy places and he just asks old ladies that are golfing what they think about the economy and what they think about Flint. And of course, they're just like, oh, I love it. Everything's great. But he's showing people getting evicted from their homes. He's showing all sorts of the effects of these things that aren't touching this community. So that's one way that you can start to see Michael Moore displaying his narrative a little bit. He doesn't say a lot. He just shows you the exact opposite of what someone else is saying as like these kind of little gotcha scenes. And that one in particular was very surreal. And the reason for that, this was one of the other key points this movie makes, was that Flint starts to become a murder capital of America, one of them, and that the crime surged in almost direct proportion with the job losses. And I just wanted to look into this just to see how accurate this was. And this is pretty true. I mean, the crime rate that you can track back to the 1960s, basically, with FBI database, and they don't really get kind of to the city level of Flint until about 1970 or 1980. So in 1980, there was something like 1,200 crimes per 100,000 citizens. And then you can see after the closing of this plant in this movie, I think it happens around like 1989 or so. As soon as that happens, the crime doubles and then it doubles again. And it's getting so incredible that they have to build more jails and brand new jails, 5-story jails, in order to house all these different criminals that the movie implies but never actually shows direct correlation that all these new criminals came from this GM plant or anything like that, but just that it's a depressed community and people are struggling. And of course, these rich people come back in and they buy $100 a night tickets in order to stay, which would be like a very nice hotel, especially in Flint, Michigan. You probably could have stayed at the Four Seasons or at a brand new Hyatt that they built also to try and spur tourism that immediately had to shut 6 months later. And, all the different things that they tried, none of it worked except for, I guess, the jail. The jail probably did great.
Yeah, no, the jail did do great, and they even showed like some of the GM employees. Now he's a prison guard, and like,
that one was one of the sadder ones because the guy is saying he's convincing himself that everything's working out for the best. And this is really weird because when they're doing the tourism campaign, they bring in Pat Boone, they bring in, Miss America and all this stuff. And the whole message really is over and over, we're fighters, we're survivors, we'll get back there. hey, it could always be worse. At least it's not blank, blank, blank. And man, none of those sounded like rallying cries. Those were all like, hey, at least you're not dying right now. That was kind of what a lot of those amounted to. And this one guy that Michael Moore interviews, that it's now a prison guard, and he's saying, yeah, I'm making less than half of what I was at the GM plant, but I'm working on my morals. And I know that even though I'm going through this, little downturn, it's going to lead to bigger and better things. And as he's trying to finish his thought, there's a verbal altercation between an inmate and another one of these guards, and it just kind of overpowers everything that they're saying. So, yeah, you can clearly see that the economy took an enormous hit. They go from interviewing GM workers to the same people that are now working at Taco Bell, working as prison guards, or in one case, this lady's just straight up killing rabbits and trying to sell, trying to make her own rabbit fur coats, and it gets kind of wild.
Yeah, what'd she say? A pet or food, right? Like, you could choose either or. And when you go back to, like, what you were saying about the statistics, this also happened to Gary, Indiana, and there's other cities too, where it has proven that, like, when these huge corporations leave because they get a lot of tax breaks and the whole community's tied within them, that they do collapse, because that's like the pretty much backbone of the whole community. And also, when you were talking about, I thought one of the funnier scenes too, when you kind of get um a peek into who Michael Moore is as his, like, antagonist, passive aggressiveness, right? He's not like as in your face as Alex Jones per se, but he's kind of like, more like you said, like backhanded. When he goes into the one, they're having some kind of, like, it's at a rich country club, and they're having like some kind of feast, and he's like, yeah, and they even let some of the locals work there. And they were just statues, like they were supposed to be human statues, where he's painting the picture of, like, hey, look at these elitists that are just like mocking you, and they think of you as, like, human cattle, and they're just having a good old time eating their caviar, and, like, they're like, oh, we'll make it, it's not too bad. And I thought that was a big key point of, kind of like you said, this film shows who Michael Moore is, and it really brings out in every other film after this.
The last point, and maybe the first point that Michael Moore actually makes himself in this movie, aside from just putting footage and hypocritical visuals next to each other, he asks a question of this guy that's actually working for GM, which he later kind of gloats, and he's like, this guy got fired 3 months later or something. But this guy was making a counterclaim to something that Michael Moore was only implying. So I'm gonna treat this as if it were a claim that Michael Moore had actually made. Because the guy's like, what do you expect us to do? What do you think, that just because GM was born out of Flint, Michigan, that it has some sort of duty to, stay in Flint, Michigan and give it its proper dues and honor it? And that seems like one of the biggest contentious points. That was one of the big disagreements between the people on the side of GM that he keeps running up into and what Michael Moore keeps implying. And I don't even know the answer to that question. It's actually an interesting question. If you start a business in a certain town and your business does amazingly well, and you know that you now outgrowing that town or leaving that town would decimate it, do you have an obligation to stay there, even if it would just run at a loss, or even if it weren't as profitable as and I'm not talking about moving to Mexico, which is fairly dramatic, right? But that town in particular, does a company have an obligation to the town that they started in?
I think that's a moral, like, issue of different for every person. I think that's what the film is kind of like contrasting, like the wealthy versus the poor, the middle class, right? Who owes who? Like, we help build this company. The company's like, we help build this town. I think that in some senses there has to be some loyalty, but yeah, it's one of those questions that it's hard to answer because it depends on your moral compass. Like, to some people, if it's just make money, then who cares, right? But I do think there is a fact of, like, you built it there and that town, you can keep expanding. I don't know why you have to leave, but I think it's because once it comes corporatized, which they kind of also allude to this in this movie, as that when things become corporate, that there is no more looking at it through a human perspective. It's only looking at the bottom line and how can we make more profits.
All right, let's start with you first on the hidden treasures of this particular movie? What were the key things that stood out to you?
To me, some of the key highlights were the actual interactions with the people. Like seeing people back then, like in '89, I was like 6 years old or 7 years old or something like that. And to see people's perspective of the town, like once it got gutted, right? Like you saw people just kind of living their new lives and trying to pick up the pieces, and how easily it was for them to leave the GM, but how hard it was for the people that can't just leave, right? You're kind of stuck there and you have to find your exit some way, and going through like every just the heartache. Like I know like it could have been like it was obviously intentional for them to put all this sappy stuff to like, well, they got me. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, dang man, I guess I'm pretty easy triggered. Like I'm already like, man, GM, man, I ain't never buying it. You know what I mean? I get all like pumped up. I just liked all the stories that they follow people like the detective that was evicting people. He was throwing people out, and it was just like they're like, who is doing good? The sheriff. And they just see him throwing people out, and it's just like, dang man, this is pretty relevant today. And so I guess because of the atmosphere that we're in right now, the political culture of like what corporations are doing, like I felt like, oh my God, I'm watching the beginning of all this stuff we talk about now. Like it felt like that was a beginning point for me.
I got a small handful of ones that really stood out for me. One of them was they actually had footage of the last truck being produced on the line at this GM factory. And as it goes off the line, it's the last truck that they're ever going to make. Everyone kind of stands around like clapping and cheering. And this one guy that's getting interviewed says, I don't know what everyone's clapping for. Everyone just lost their jobs. And he's kind of standing there. And it is just weird. I mean, I can see it from both sides too, though. It's almost like an applaud to yourself of like, I'm sure it wasn't a happy applause, but it was just like, hey, look at everything that we've accomplished. Let's, pat ourselves on the back for everything that we did. And this is the mentality of like one of the line workers. But it was kind of crazy. Like everyone's cheering and congratulating each other. And then you see as time progresses, that nothing really good came out of this, at least for Flint. Another one was that the guy that he's talking to from GM is a guy named Tom K. And he starts it out talking about how Roger Smith, CEO GM, he's like, he's not inhuman. And I don't know, that's a weird thing to just imagine. If someone was like, hey, tell me about Sean Chris. And I was like, oh, he's not inhuman. I don't know what you're like. That's for that to be one of the first things you go to. It already makes me think, well, I wasn't thinking he wasn't human before, but now I kind of want to ask you specifically, is he human? But one of the other things that he's mentioning is, well, I don't think Flint, this is the end of Flint. It just is going to require another, boom, some other entrepreneur that puts this town back on the map. And he notes that these lint rollers are getting really popular. And Michael Moore stops him and he's like, Tom, like the way that he says it. And he's like, are you telling me lint rollers are going to pull Flint out of a depression? He's like, I don't know. Could be. It might happen. And I just think that his ability to stop him and just be like, dude, come on. I know that you're kind of sniffing your own farts right now, but let's bring this back to reality. And I do like that he had the balls to do that. And that even gets escalated one extra step because he goes to see Roger Smith at this Waldorf Astoria meeting, and he is given this talk, or he's going to be there. But apparently someone on Michael Moore's crew was a relative of Ralph Nader. I'm sure there's a story there. But they end up escorting him out. They just pick up his chair with the cops and they bring him outside. And Michael Morse makes it sound like they carry him all the way to the precinct. He probably gets stuffed into a paddy wagon, but he doesn't back down. I'll say for the credit, that's one of the biggest shining moments is that he does, when he gets an interaction with someone, he does seem to ask them questions and then stop them when they start to say something that doesn't make sense, which you don't see very often. And I'm sure he's probably burnt all of his bridges at this point.
And he was pretty relentless throughout the film because he finally does, spoiler alert, finally gets a hold of Roger. First, they have the one where he's at the GM meeting, and then like they're like, "Any more questions?" And they're like, "We have Michael Moore." And that's where they kind of shut him down, and then he finally talks him at the end. You kind of do get the payoff and he's like, hey, well, you want to go see Flint? Because the whole movie is he's like, I want to take Roger Smith to see what's happening to Flint, Michigan from this pullout. And then he's like, I'm not going to Flint. Like, that's one of my favorite moments because he gets pretty agitated because he has this ability to get under your skin, but without really yelling or like using vulgar language. He just really this kind of like the only way I could say it is like he's just like passive aggressive. Like he's very passive aggressive and he's relentless. He'll keep coming at you and he kind of plays that dumb, oh really? I can't, like he goes at the one scene and he's like trying to go to the top floor of the GM building and he's like pressing it like, this is weird. And he's like, oh, we're just trying to get a meeting with Roger Smith. And he's like, no, bro, like you can't just come in here. This is like, private property and stuff. But like you said, to his credit, he's very persistent.
So it's not all treasures in this whole movie. There's quite a few kind of overboard moments that I would say. So a small handful of these. The sarcasm kind of defines the movie, although I'm not going to hold that against it because that was sort of his trademark. That was the Michael Moore trademark of a documentary. You're going to get some sarcasm. One of the biggest sort of issues that I've got with it is that the movie's called Roger and Me. We never actually see Roger Smith aside from that tiny little clip as he's getting like shoot out. But did you know that he actually did get a full 10 questions back and forth with Roger Smith, and it just got edited out of the movie because the responses that Roger Smith was giving weren't as entertaining as they would have wanted for this movie. So I feel like that's burying the lead. The whole premise of the movie is trying to paint this metaphor about Roger Smith's dodging me and ducking me, and of course he's never going to talk to me because he can't justify himself, only to hear that he actually got a full 10 questions back and forth, and it just never made the movie.
He has heavy biases in all his films that do leak out. And I didn't know that, but knowing him, I do not put it past him because you're right. Like, it's like the meat and potatoes of the film. You're like, yeah, let's just take that. Just keep the carrots. Like,
and then the other thing too, that I noticed immediately in this movie is that since he can't get Roger Smith, and I say can't knowing that he did get him, he just edited all that footage out, but that he's pretending like he can't get Roger Smith, it's all about gotcha questions of going into the GM headquarters and giving the security guard a hard time, and then giving a secretary the hard time, and then going inside of a country club that Roger Smith is part of, and kind of doing that, well, I'm not going to leave, and he's kind of being a dick about all of this. And it was very similar to some of the other movies that we had seen, documentaries, where someone just goes and harasses, I can't remember if it was Aaron Russo, just goes and harasses some security guard outside of the Federal Reserve in DC. And it's like, this is what's wrong with Washington. And this guy's getting paid, $8 an hour or something. He's not getting paid to be in this Aaron Russo film. So there's almost entirely that. In fact, he's talking to the Taco Bell shift manager. He's talking to some lady that breeds and kills rabbits, either for food or for pets, throughout the whole movie. And then he's tagging along with the sheriff doing evictions. That's 90% of the movie, in my opinion, are him just hanging out with these other people. The lady that's killing rabbits didn't even work at GM. She's got a brother or something that maybe worked there. But as far as I can tell, she's always been a rabbit lady and nothing to do with GM or Flint or any of that. And the way that it gets edited together, the feeling is like, oh, she must have got laid off from the line and she's directly affected. No, it was just, entertaining footage that he spliced into this movie. So that's a majority of the movie are things that feel somewhat unrelated to the premise itself.
Yeah, it's carrot and stick throughout the movie. You're being dragged along to this, okay, I'm going to see him versus Roger. And every time it's like, wah, 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 until the end where you get a little bit of it. But that's because he kind of caught him off guard. And I think that's also kind of like one of the overboard moments is that he only asks questions that benefit his bias, right? He doesn't actually look for truth necessarily. He looks for questions that are going to validate his already thoughts. And like you said, gotcha moments every time.
The cultural impact of this movie is actually really significant, in my opinion. Usually, when this topic comes up about how much a particular documentary affected everything, only a handful seem to have been obvious. This is one of those really obvious ones because I was mentioning without Michael Moore, and without Roger and me, we don't get Michael Moore necessarily. And without Michael Moore, we don't get Daily Show and Stephen Colbert's sarcasm mixed with politics. But we also have this man on the street segments, the juxtaposition of someone saying something and then putting the exact opposite up to it, and this satirical, what you said, passive aggressive nature. This was seen as unprofessional, usually in a documentary or in sort of like a news environment. So it kind of flips a lot of that on its head. Here's a guy that's like, I'm not going to dress up. I'm just going to turn into a slob and just ask you annoying questions and refuse to leave. But he sort of owns that. And without that, without this movie in particular, we don't get everything else that he produces afterwards. And whether you like it or not, Michael Moore is kind of a cultural icon. Like, he can say something and people will do the thing that he said. And some even credited him with like Trump's first victory in some of these cases.
And I think he also gave birth to the citizen journalist, right? Like, he going and knocking on doors and getting the opinion of people in the towns, like that. Like you said, that was unheard of, especially because this was a major film. This was with Warner Brothers. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm putting it out on InfoWars. You know what I mean? He's actually had a big studio behind him, and he's dealt with Hollywood, and he's very influential, like you said, of not just like the main people in Hollywood or people doing this political satire kind of stuff, but I think citizen journalism, which is huge now. All these independent YouTube channels are doing the same things, man on the street interviews, when at that time it was like the first of its kind.
Sink or swim, where you at?
I'm on a swim, man. I really like the film. I think it's because I like the way that Michael Moore puts films together. Even though there's so much like B-roll and unnecessary, like it could have been 20, 30 minutes, right? Like it could have been a short film of like, hey, this is what happened in Flint. It's all destroyed, but he stretches it out. But the way that he transitions, his little humor and his music choices, he's really good at picking music choices. I think it's something that people will enjoy to watch, and you can relate to what's going on today a little bit to what went on then.
We're gonna differ just a littlest bit here. This was a hard decision. I was like totally on the fence on this one. I gotta call it a sink, just because it doesn't really present any new information. What it is, though, it is a true documentary. I don't think that it's not a documentary. You can find a lot of people that say anything that Michael Moore does is just straight up propaganda, doesn't count as documentary. That's not true, man. This is a guy that actually went boots on the ground and talked to normal people, talked to that Taco Bell manager, hung out with that sheriff's deputy, and followed around and doing all these evictions, got footage of the last truck leaving the line and everyone's opinions on it. Like, he went and talked to the people that you would talk to document something happening. So this is absolutely an American documentary. And I do think that it's probably worthy watching. If you're even slightly interested in how GM leaving this town and closing the factories affected this entire city for decades to come afterwards, 100% watch it. But on our really tight scale of like, it either, sinks or it swims, I got to say it sinks just for that reason, is that this could have been about any sort of economic collapse in any city. And Michael Moore also in this particular movie doesn't kind of present any specific claims. He never says, and here's what I think, or here's what could have been done better, or here, like even the point that other auto companies didn't have to move to Mexico and were able to remain competitive and incredibly profitable. And the fact that even GM itself had a record-breaking profit year, none of that really comes up directly. It was replaced with the smarmy man on the street interviews and the lady that literally clubs a rabbit to death on film. That's what you get, instead of some of the things that answer the hypotheticals that he kind of just like teases out there. So you have to understand that there's such a strict bias in that. But yeah, I mean, it was a hard call for me because I do recommend watching it, but I still don't think that it meets my personal scale of this is like, goes in the Criterion collection. this is Michael Moore month, so we're gonna do another Michael Moore movie and then another one after that. But I think 3 is probably as much as I can take. The next one we're gonna watch is Bowling for Columbine, which is way bigger than any of the other documentaries I believe he's ever produced. So I don't know. Have you seen Bowling for Columbine before?
Yeah, I have. I've seen it. Like I said, Michael Moore kind of got me into this down the path. Like you said, he's pretty influential. Like maybe I don't agree with him, like, but he is one of the people that kind of propelled me into like looking into more of these topics.
All right, well, we're gonna get into that one. Let us know. Do you love Michael Moore? Do you hate him? Are you the #1 fan like Sean and Chris over here that donates money to him just to make more content? You're on his Patreon, I believe you said before we started recording. Yeah. So let us know what you think about Michael Moore, and look out for the next one.
Under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Buried deep, but we're breaking the locks. Footage got clipped, they erased all the shots. We stay connected dots. Under the docks, under the docks, yeah, under the docks. Yeah, under the docks.
And all American stickers, cryptids, cults, and killers. We got all your favorite conspiracies, all that and more on our sticker sheets. Paranoid American stickers, they'll make you smile and snicker. False flags and secret societies, all of these and more on our sticker sheets.
Explore the unique with Paranoid American sticker sheets. Unearth tales of cryptids, cults, and mysteries through each sticker. These won't last long. Get yours now at paranoidamerican.com.
We're all American stickers, cryptids, cults, and killers. We got all your favorite conspiracies, all that and more on our sticker sheets. Paranoid American stickers, they'll make you smile and snicker. False flags and secret societies, all of these and more on our sticker sheets.
What the heck are you waiting for? Discover the extraordinary with Paranoid American sticker sheets. From cryptids in the night to cults out of sight, each sticker is a unique find. Get yours now at paranoidamerican.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Matters not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when a beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.